The day the river swallowed the road, everyone remembered the woman they once called crazy. But when she first started building her house on barrels and steel beams, nobody believed she was preparing for anything except embarrassment. Her name was Elena Morin, a single mother living in a quiet riverside town in Manitoba. The Red River had always been part of life there, beautiful in summer, frozen solid in winter, and occasionally moody in spring. But, occasionally moody, had started turning into something else. The floods were coming closer together. The water lines on the old dock posts crept higher every year. Elena noticed. Others didn't want to. After her husband passed away from a sudden heart attack, Elena was left with her 8-year-old son, Lucas, and a modest life insurance payout. Most people told her to move closer to Winnipeg, somewhere safer. But this town was home. It held her memories, her grief, and the last place Lucas still felt his father's presence. So instead of leaving, she made a decision that made the entire neighborhood whisper. She hired an engineer from Brandon and started designing a house that could float. Not a boat, a real house. A small, sturdy, beautiful wooden home built on a buoyant foundation system using sealed pontoons and a guided piling system that would allow the structure to rise vertically if floodwaters came. The house would stay anchored, but it would lift with the water instead of drowning beneath it. When the first truck delivered the flotation drums, her neighbor Gary leaned over the fence and laughed. Planning to sail to Ontario, Elena. Others joined in. At the grocery store, she overheard people calling it, that circus project. One woman said, grief makes people do strange things. The worst part wasn't the laughter. It was the doubt creeping into her own mind at night. When Lucas was asleep and the house frame stood skeletal against the prairie sky, she'd sit alone in her old kitchen and wonder if she was wasting everything she had. But she remembered the evacuation 2 years earlier. She remembered holding Lucas on her hip as they waded through knee-deep water to reach a rescue truck. She remembered his shaking voice asking if the river was going to take their home. She promised him it wouldn't happen again. Construction took almost a year. Money ran tight. Elena worked double shifts at the local health clinic. She sold her SUV and bought an old pickup. She learned more about structural integrity, buoyancy ratios, and climate projections than she ever thought she would. Lucas became her little assistant. He carried nails, held measuring tape, and told anyone who would listen, "Our house can float like a boat." The day they moved in, it looked nothing like a boat. It looked like a cozy Canadian riverside home, cedar siding, wide windows, a small porch facing the water. Only the subtle steel guideposts at the corners hinted at something different. Spring came again. The snowpack that year was heavy across southern Manitoba. News stations began warning about rapid melt due to sudden warm temperatures. The river levels climbed fast. Still, most of the neighbors stayed calm. They'd seen high water before. Then the rain came. 3 days of relentless rain. The river swelled beyond forecasts. Sandbag stations reopened. Emergency alerts buzzed across phones. Gary's basement flooded first. By the second night, the street looked like a shallow lake. People scrambled to move valuables upstairs. Trucks hauled furniture away. Some families evacuated entirely. Elena stood on her porch with Lucas, watching the water creep toward their yard. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought Lucas could hear it. "Mom," he whispered, gripping her hand. "Is it time?" She nodded. By morning, the river had claimed the road. Water surrounded their property completely. The neighbors who had once laughed were now watching from second-floor windows or rescue boats. And then it happened. The water reached the base of Elena's house. At first, nothing seemed different. Then, slowly, almost gently, the structure began to rise. Not dramatically, not wildly, just steadily. The guideposts held firm as the flotation system engaged exactly as designed. The porch steps disappeared beneath the water, but the house lifted cleanly above it. Level, stable. Lucas gasped, eyes wide with wonder. "It's working." Elena's knees nearly gave out from relief. Across the water, Gary stared in disbelief from his upstairs window as his own home filled with muddy river water. Elena's house floated calmly, anchored but elevated, like it had always belonged there. Emergency crews later said it was one of the worst floods in a decade. Insurance claims piled up. Families faced months of repairs and heartbreak. But Elena and Lucas slept dry and safe above the water. When the flood finally receded weeks later, the town looked different. Sodden drywall lined curbs. The smell of damp wood lingered in the air. Elena's house gently lowered back onto its original position as the river returned to its banks. The first person to knock on her door was Gary. He stood there awkwardly, hat in hand. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I should have listened." One by one, others came too, not just to apologize, but to ask questions. How much did it cost? Who engineered it? Could it be done to existing homes? Elena didn't feel triumphant. She felt something softer. Vindicated, yes, but mostly grateful she hadn't let fear or mockery silence her instincts. Within 2 years, 3 more homes along the river adopted similar floating foundations. The town council even began reviewing updated building recommendations for flood-prone zones. Elena never intended to start a movement. She just wanted to keep her child safe. One evening the following spring, she and Lucas sat on the porch watching the calm river reflect the sunset. The water looked harmless again, almost innocent. "Do you think they'll still call you crazy?" Lucas asked. Elena smiled gently. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes crazy just means you're willing to see what others refuse to." Lucas leaned against her shoulder. "I think you're brave," and that meant more than every apology combined. The river would always rise and fall. Climate would change. Storms would come. But fear didn't have to win. Preparation, courage, and love could float higher than doubt. The day the river swallowed the road, the town remembered the woman they once laughed at. But Lucas would always remember the day his mother showed him that being different can be the very thing that saves you. And sometimes, the house that floats is built not just on steel and barrels, but on resilience.